When you've finished watching this tutorial, you're going to be a noise reduction ninja. Hi, my name is Klaus Hermann and you can find me on farbspielfoto.com, where I show you how to create and craft better photos. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you a very effective workflow for reducing the noise in your images using Topaz DeNoise 6. Topaz Labs have released the latest version of their noise reduction software recently, and while they did not update the core noise reduction functionality of the previous version, it is still one of the best, if not the best, noise reduction software out there. However, you need to know what you're doing to get the most out of the application, and today I'm going to show you how to do just that. The first thing that we need to do in order to reduce the noise in our image is to prepare it either in Lightroom or in Camera Raw. Now, both of these applications have the same raw development engine, so it doesn't really matter which one you're using. If you open the raw file directly into Photoshop, you're going to open Adobe Camera Raw. I prefer to use Lightroom, so that's where I will start here. You see that I have a test image to show you the noise reduction workflow. And what you have to know about Lightroom is whenever you import an image, it is going to apply some processing steps, even if you don't know it. And you can see those if you open the Develop module and go to the Detail tab. And that's where the sharpening and noise reduction settings of Lightroom live. Now, it is very important that we disable all these settings before we put the image into DeNoise, into Topaz DeNoise, because DeNoise works best if it's presented with the noise that comes straight out of the camera. If we apply any noise reduction step before that or any sharpening, we're going to alter the noise. We're going to change it, and that makes the job of DeNoise much harder. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to reduce the sharpening amount to 0, and I'm going to reduce the color noise reduction amount to 0. And if I zoom in, and this is 200%, you can see that we have a very noisy image here. I shot this with a Nikon D7000, so it's an older camera, and I used ISO 6400, which is the highest native ISO that this camera can do. And the result is a very, very noisy image. You can see that we have a lot of color noise and luminance noise here. So I've reduced or disabled all the sharpening and noise reduction settings inside Lightroom, and the final thing that I'm going to do here is closing the Details tab, and I go to the Lens Corrections tab. And what I want to do in addition to that is to remove the chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration is an optical effect created by the lens, which leads to color fringes. And those color fringes can throw off any noise reduction software easily because it is trying to detect color noise, and color fringes are kind of interfering with that, at least in my experience. So I'm just going to enable the Remove Chromatic Aberration checkbox here, and Lightroom is going to look up the lens properties in its database and change the image so that those color fringes disappear. As soon as I've finished preparing the image in Lightroom, I'm opening it in Adobe Photoshop. And to do that, I'm hovering my mouse over the preview area, right-click and choose Edit in Adobe Photoshop. Now that brings the image into Photoshop as a new document with the image as a background layer. And the first thing that I do is I press Command or Control J to create a copy of that layer in order to preserve the original image pixels. And on that copy, I apply the denoise filter. I go to the filter menu, to Topaz Labs, and choose Topaz DeNoise 6. Now that's opening the image inside Topaz DeNoise. And I'm not going to give you a complete tour of the software. I'm just concentrating on the core noise reduction workflow from scratch, okay? So you could theoretically apply one of those presets here, but essentially they're either too strong or too weak for a given image, and you're going to find yourself thrown into some sort of spot in the settings, in the space of the overall settings that you can apply. And it's always better to start from scratch and develop your settings for this specific image here. So I'm closing down this panel here, and I concentrate on the right side where we have the core noise reduction settings. Now, the first thing that I do for my workflow is press the reset button, because whenever you apply Topaz DeNoise to an image and you open a new one, it's going to remember those settings from the last session. And that's generally not what you want, because each image is different and requires a different kind of noise reduction settings. So reset the image, and then the thing that you need to understand about noise is that it's basically made up of two components. One is the luminance noise, which are the bright and dark speckles that you usually see on your image. And then you have the color noise, which is composed of red and blue and green speckles, okay? So now both of these types of noises are typically interrelated due to the nature of your camera sensor, but most noise reduction software offers you ways of dealing with them separately, and that's also the case in Topaz DeNoise. So the first thing that we're going to do in our workflow is to reduce the luminance noise. And to do that, I am going to the preview mode. Up here you see 5 buttons for different preview modes, and I'm going to the preview mode Luma. And that eliminates all the color noise from the preview. It doesn't alter the image, it just displays the image so that I don't see the color noise. Now, in order to show you how to reduce the luminance noise effectively, let me just navigate to a typical region of this image here. And the reason why I'm choosing this part of the image is that it has all the different tonal ranges in it. So it's got some midtones here in the middle. Then we've got a transition to some darker tones, which represent the shadows in the image. And then we have some brighter midtones up here in the background. Now, another property of noise that's coming out of your camera is that it is not distributed evenly throughout the image. Actually, the darker regions of your image will always receive more noise than the highlights, because in the highlights we have a very strong signal. So those pixels on your sensor were able to collect a lot of photons, so to speak, and those electrons and photons that actually cause the noise do not matter that much. It's a very, very simple explanation of what goes on in the physics of your sensor. And that's why you always have less noise in the highlights than in the midtones, and more noise in the shadows than in the midtones. So the most noise lives in the shadows, then they're in the midtones, and then there's very little noise actually in the highlights of your images typically. So, and to reduce the noise under those circumstances, Topaz DeNoise actually offers us 3 different sliders for the luminance noise reduction. The first one is the overall strength slider, which kind of applies a uniform amount of noise reduction to the entire image, and then you can adjust the shadows and highlights separately with the 2 respective sliders that we have here, the adjust shadow slider and the adjust highlight slider. But first, let's go to the overall strength slider and increase that gradually. So I'm taking little steps and increasing the slider, and I'm always looking at the midtones. Those are the important pixels at this stage of the workflow. And what I'm trying to achieve is a good balance between reducing the noise and preserving the details in your image. That's my goal always for noise reduction. And what that means is that you don't want to go too far in any of the steps that you're going to see in this workflow. So I'll increase this slider up to a point where you still see details and presumably some noise in those areas, because that means we still got some details left here. And I think a setting of about 0.22 is just about right at that stage of the workflow. And you can see when I click on the image, DeNoise shows me the original image with all the noise in it, and when I let go, it shows me the image with the noise reduction applied. So you can see that we've removed a lot of noise from that area here in the middle of the image. But you still see a lot of noise in those shadow areas. That's what I was referring to. That's the area that received most of the noise when the image was taken in your camera. Now, as soon as you have you're content with the setting of the overall strength slider, it's time to adjust the shadow noise. And we're going to increase that slider to get rid of the noise in those areas. And I do the same thing. I'm increasing it step by step until I get to a point where there's still some details in that area, but not a lot of noise. Okay, that's the fine line that I'm trying to strike here. And one thing that you can see immediately is, let me just show you the before and after here, before, after. So we've removed a lot of noise, but you can see in the transitional area here, where we move from the shadows to the midtones, there's still noise left. And we're not going to be able to reduce that without softening some of the image a lot. So we're going to take care of that in a subsequent step, and I'm going to show you that at the end of the tutorial. Now that we've reduced the noise in the midtones and the shadow areas, I'm going to take a look at one of the highlight sections of this image here. And that's the bright side of this box here. And you see, when I click to show the original image, that there are those spiral kind of shapes in this area. And when I let go, you see that those are totally blurred. You can barely see them in the image that has the noise reduction applied to it. And what that means is that in those highlight areas, as I said, those receive very little noise actually in your camera. So the amount of noise reduction that I have applied to this image currently is too much for those highlight areas. And that's where the adjust highlight slider comes in. Now, I will just drag that slider all the way to -1 because I know that Topaz DeNoise always applies a lot of additional noise reduction to those highlight areas. And you can see when I do this, actually those details come back here, and you can actually see those spirals a lot better than before. Now, typically, when the noise comes back to the highlights areas, by doing this, I would increase the adjust highlight slider here just slightly. But I think at -1, I barely see any noise here, but the details have come back. So I think that -1 is the right setting for this image here. So we have set the overall strength, the shadow adjustments, and the highlight adjustments now. And now it's time to recover some of the details that we lost in this process. Now let me go back to the label of the bottle here. And you see that I can do this by clicking and dragging in this preview area. That gives me this little blue box which shows me what I'm actually viewing in the preview. And to get back the details, we have the detail recovery section down here, which essentially is comprised of 3 different sliders: the recover detail slider, the reduce blur slider, and the add grain slider. Now, let me first go to the recover detail slider. And what I like to do for this section is I'd like to set this to its maximum value. Okay, 1.0, that's the maximum value of those sliders. And you can see that by doing that, I brought back a large amount of noise in those areas that I already reduced the noise in. And now I'm going to work my way back with the slider in order to reduce that noise again. So I'm looking for a setting where all that additional noise disappears, but some of the details are recovered in the area, in the image. So you can see that typically a setting around 0.2, 0.3, that's typically a good setting for this type of image. And of course, it's always up to your own personal preference whether you would like to have more details and a little bit more noise, or less details in the smoother image and probably a loss of some of the original image details. But I think 0.22 is a good setting here. And now I'm going to go to the reduce blurs setting, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm cranking it up all the way to 1.0. And you can see what that does. It actually applies a kind of sharpening to the image. So the result is similar to an image that you have applied an excessive amount of unsharp mask to. And you can see that in the edges where you've got those halos around the edges. And again, I'm going to take that slider and take it gradually back down until the excessive noise and the haloing around the edges disappears. And I'm always looking at the image while I'm dragging the slider back. And around a value of, I guess, 0.15, that seems to be okay to me. Okay, so we have reduced recovered some of the detail with the recover detail and reduce blur slider, but you have to be very careful not to bring the noise back in. Now, the add grain slider in this section is actually for cases when you apply a very high amount of noise reduction and your image starts looking very smooth, almost as if you used a flat iron to iron out all the wrinkles, and it gets this unnatural look to it. And that's when you can add some grain back to get a more natural look, but I'm not going to use this. And generally, I use it very, very rarely in my workflow. In a second, I will come to the second major step in the workflow, which is to reduce the color noise. But before I do that, you can see that by recovering the details, some of the image noise has creeped back into our image. And I'm going to go back up to the overall strength slider and just increase that slightly to smooth out those details just a little bit more. And I think that's about the setting that works for this image here. Okay, so that takes us from the luminance noise to the color noise. And in order to reduce the color noise, we have 3 additional preview modes here. And I'm going to start with the red preview mode. And what that shows me is the red component of the noise in this image. And you can see we have a lot of blotches and splotches here in this area, which are the areas where we have a lot of red noise happening. And to counter that, we have the adjust color red slider here. And I'm going to drag that up. And you can see that I don't need to go very far for those blotches to disappear. Now again, I'm not going to go overboard with the slider. So I'm trying to strike a balance where I still see some of the details. But the most of the red noise is removed. And I think that's the case now here with a setting of 0.18. And that takes me to the next step, which is the blue noise. When I enable the blue preview mode, you can see, again, we've got some splotches here in this area, for example, where we have a lot of blue noise. And I'm going to use the adjust color blue slider to reduce that. And you don't have to go very far with those sliders in general before you see that most of that noise is actually removed. Now, the final step in removing or reducing the color noise is to go to the color preview mode here and use the clean color slider that you see down here. And what that does, it cleans up some of the artifacts that have been left over by the previous steps. And to show you what I mean here, I go to the edge of the bottle here. I'm going to go to 400% magnification, and you can see that we've got some red and green artifacts showing up in this area. And when I use the clean color slider, very carefully, those artifacts are removed. You can take a little bit more here, and you see that they're almost entirely gone now. So that's the before with a lot of color noise on that very edge. And that's the after where the edge has been nicely cleaned up just by using the clean color slider in the color preview mode. That completes the step where I removed the color noise. And now I'm going to go back to the RGB preview mode to view the entire image. And let me just zoom out to 200% here. And I'm inspecting the image. And you can still see that there are regions with too much noise here, but I'm going to deal with that, as I said, in a subsequent step. I'm just going to go around the image and see whether we've got any work left to do inside denoise at that stage, or whether the image is just fine. And I think, let me just go over here to some of those areas. You can also see some excessive noise here in this area. But if I were trying to remove that, I would be smoothing the rest of the image so much that the result would not be very desirable. So I'm going to leave that to the next step in the overall process. Now the final thing that I want to show you is this correct black level slider. I don't think we need it in this image, but what you have in some images, particularly if you have a night sky in your image, this night sky can look very unnatural and can be brightened to a degree that looks strange by the noise reduction process. And in those cases, you can use the correct black level slider that you have down here to get some of that richness in the deep shadows of your image back. As I said, we don't need it here in this step, I think. So I think the image looks good for now, and I'm just going to press the OK button. And Topaz DeNoise applies that noise reduction that we've just dialed in with the sliders to the image layer in Photoshop. Now that we're back in Photoshop with the noise reduction applied to our image layer, let's check out the details and look at the before and after here. So I'm just zooming in to the same zoom level as I had in Topaz DeNoise. And you can see, if I show you the before and the after, the noise has been nicely reduced. Of course, the image has been softened by that due to the excessive amount of noise, and that always leads to a reduction or a loss of details in the image. But still, the result is pretty good, except for those areas that I've already mentioned where DeNoise kind of missed it and wasn't able to reduce the noise unless I would have cranked up the overall strength a lot and smoothed the rest of the image in an unacceptable way. I didn't want to do that, so now is the time to take a second pass to create a second layer and apply DeNoise to get rid of that noise. Now let me do that right now. I'm going to select the background layer here. I press Command or Control J, and let me put that on top of the image here. You can see that's the original noisy image. And I go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and do another run of Topaz DeNoise 6. And what I'm doing now is I'm just paying attention to those areas, and I'm trying to reduce the noise in those as much as possible. And I don't care about the rest, because the rest has already been denoised. And after I've finished this step in DeNoise, in Topaz DeNoise, I will blend those images together using a layer mask. Okay, so I'm using a typical Photoshop means for blending those two versions afterwards. So I'm just concentrating on this area, for example, and I'm increasing the overall strength here, because those are mid-tone areas. And I increase the strength until I see that those areas look clean. Let me go back to the label of the bottle here. And that also looks pretty clean here. Okay, so I've increased the overall strength to 0.35. I'm going to apply that setting. Now, by the way, all those specific settings don't mean anything. You have to use specific settings for any type of image that you reduce the noise on. So don't think that whenever you use ISO 6400, you need to apply a 0.25 or something that I've shown you here. It's always down to the individual image, and you need to develop the settings for each individual image individually. So Topaz DeNoise has now finished processing our second image layer. And you can see, if I show you the before and after, that's the result of the original DeNoise pass or DeNoise run. And that's the image that we've just created. Now, all that's left is to create a layer mask, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on the layer mask icon down here. And that hides the additional layer that we've just created. And now I'm going to pick the brush tool and make my foreground color white. And I'm going to choose a very low flow value. So I already have 10% here as a flow value. That allows me to control very nicely the amount of pixels of that new layer that I'm going to blend into the original noise reduction layer. So I'm going to carefully brush in those areas, and you can see that slowly but surely that noise disappears because I am blending in the pixels of the upper layer with the pixels of the layer beneath that was our main noise reduction layer. So you can go through the entire image, and wherever you find excessive noise, just blend in those pixels of the new noise reduction layer. Now let me go to that other area that we worked on all the time, the label of the bottle here. And again, you see the transition between the shadows and the midtones in the label here is still quite noisy. So I'm going to paint on here too. You can see that I'm able to reduce the noise very nicely in those areas. Okay, so I'm probably going to go through the entire image now and fix those areas just by blending them in. But that actually completes the workflow for this image, and you've seen that it was a very effective way of removing noise while still retaining the details, and actually creating different versions of the image and blending them in eventually in Photoshop. In this tutorial, I've shown you a very effective method for reducing the noise in your images using Topaz DeNoise 6. First, we have prepared the image in Lightroom by disabling all the noise reduction and sharpening settings in order to provide denoise with the original noise created in camera. Then, we took the image into Photoshop and applied the Topaz DeNoise 6 filter to it. Inside the denoise software, we first reduced the luminance noise in the midtones, shadows and highlights before we recovered some of the details that got lost during that process. Next, we took care of the color noise, and finally we did some fine-tuning to finish this noise reduction step. To improve the results even further, we applied denoise a second time to a new copy of the image layer. This time we took care of the areas that still had some noise. Finally, we used a layer mask to blend the two processed layers together and get the optimal noise reduction result. If you want more tutorials like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and sign up for our newsletter to get the latest and greatest Photoshop, Lightroom and photography tutorials straight to your inbox. That's all from me for today. See you next time and keep creating.